There are moments in a marriage that don't announce themselves as endings. They arrive quietly, dressed like ordinary evenings. A clink of crystal, the rustle of silk, the sound of applause from people who should know better. Elara Moretti had survived 17 years of ordinary evenings exactly like this one. She had learned to read a room the way other women read weather, the shift in air pressure before something breaks, the stillness that comes right before someone decides to burn everything down. She felt it the moment Cassian's fingers closed around the black crest ring and pulled it from his own hand. The ballroom went quiet in stages. First the musicians, then the laughter, then even the ice in the glasses seemed to stop moving. 300 people, captains, consiglieri, politicians who owed their careers to the Moretti name, judges who had looked the other way for a generation. All of them turned and watched Cassian Moretti slide that ring onto Celine Voss's finger like it was the most natural thing in the world. Elara didn't move. She held her champagne glass with both hands and watched her husband crown another woman in front of everyone who had ever called her their queen. If you had been in that room, standing where she stood, what would you have done? That question matters. Because what Elara Moretti chose to do next, what she didn't do, the way she didn't scream and didn't cry and didn't throw the glass, that quiet decision would reshape everything, not just her life, all of theirs. Before you go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. Stories like this one don't come around often, and you don't want to walk in halfway. And drop a like, then tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The Moretti Centennial had been in planning for 11 months. Elara knew this because she had planned most of it herself. The venue, the security rotations, the seating chart arranged so that the De Luca faction sat nowhere near the Vitale representatives, the menu designed around the dietary restrictions of 3 different capos who would have taken offense at being overlooked. She had handled the floral arrangements and the encrypted communications, inviting the most dangerous men in 5 states to share a room peacefully for one evening. She had done all of this without being asked, because after 17 years, the machinery of the Moretti Empire ran partly through her hands, whether anyone acknowledged it or not. Cassian had walked through the finished ballroom 2 hours before guests arrived, looked around at what she had built, and said, "It's good." Then he'd gone to get dressed. She had stood in the empty room for a moment after he left. The chandeliers threw prismed light across the marble floor. The floral arrangements cost more than most people's cars. Everything was exactly right, and no one would know she had touched any of it, and she had told herself that was fine. That was how this worked. She was not a woman who needed credit. She had believed that about herself for 17 years. She was starting to understand it had been a useful lie she'd told herself to survive. Guests began arriving at 7. By 8, the room was full and loud and gilded, the kind of beautiful that only organized money and organized violence can produce together. Elara moved through it with the practiced ease of someone who had attended 100 evenings exactly like this. A word here, a touch on the arm there, a smile deployed with surgical precision at the right moment. She had learned long ago that her job at these events was to be warm without being memorable, present without being threatening, gracious without giving anyone the impression she was paying attention. She was always paying attention. She noticed Celine Voss arrive at 8:15 in a dress that cost someone a great deal of money. She noticed which capos Celine greeted and in what order. She noticed the small, satisfied smile Celine wore when she thought no one was watching. Not the performed smile she gave to the room, but the private one, the one that meant something had already been decided. Elara had seen that smile before, in the mirror, in her younger years, when she herself had known something the room hadn't caught up to yet. She filed it away and kept moving. The formal portion of the evening began at 9. Speeches, toasts, the ceremonial business of marking 100 years of a family that had survived by being smarter and more ruthless than every institution that had tried to bury it. Elara sat at the primary table to Cassian's left, not his right. She had stopped occupying his right side at events 2 years ago without either of them acknowledging the shift, and watched her husband command the room the way he always had. Cassian Moretti was genuinely magnetic. She had never been able to subtract that from her accounting of him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and he wore authority the way other men wore cologne, naturally, without effort. And even now, even after everything she had begun to understand about their marriage, She could still feel the pull of it. That made what came next worse, not better. Cassian rose for his final toast of the evening. He spoke about legacy. He spoke about sacrifice. He spoke about the kind of strength that doesn't bend and the kind of loyalty that doesn't waver, and every word was true in its own way and hollow in ways he didn't seem to notice. Then he paused. He reached into his jacket, and he removed the black crest ring. The room felt it before it understood it. Something shifted in the air. A collective inhale, 300 people suddenly more alert without knowing why. The black crest ring was not a piece of jewelry. It was the oldest physical artifact in the Moretti family's history, a thick black band set with a carved obsidian crest that Cassian's grandfather had worn for 40 years, and his father had worn until the day he died, and Cassian himself had worn since the night of his own ascension. It did not come off. It was not symbolic. Every person in that room knew what that ring meant, and they watched in frozen silence as Cassian turned away from the head table and walked the 3 steps to where Celine Voss stood. He took her hand. He slid the ring onto her finger. He said, "The future of this family stands here." 300 people did not breathe. Alara set her champagne glass on the table. She set it down carefully, with both hands, the way you handle something you don't want to break by accident. Then she stood, smoothed the front of her dress, and walked out of the ballroom. She did not hurry. She did not look back. She did not make a scene, which would have been easy. Which part of her wanted badly enough that she could taste it? The hot, satisfying disaster of overturning the table, of saying everything she had stored up for years in front of every witness who mattered. She didn't. Because she had learned a long time ago that the woman who screams in that room loses something she can never recover, and she was not yet ready to lose. The silence she left behind her was its own kind of statement. It spread through the room like cold water, people looking at each other, looking at the floor, looking anywhere except at Cassian or Celine, because looking at them felt suddenly like an act of complicity no one wanted to commit. Nobody knelt. Nobody raised a glass. Nobody said a word of congratulation. Cassian noticed. He swept his gaze across the room and saw 300 people who should have been celebrating and were instead studying the tablecloths. And something flickered across his face. Not doubt exactly, more like the first cold touch of a question he wasn't ready to ask. He set it aside. He told himself it was wounded loyalty, old men uncomfortable with change, the natural resistance of people who don't like what they can't control. He had managed resistance before. He turned back to Celine, who was holding her hand up and looking at the ring, and he told himself he had made the right decision. The night Alara walked out of the Moretti Centennial, she drove herself home. This was notable because Alara Moretti had not driven herself anywhere in 11 years. There were drivers. There was security. There was an entire infrastructure built around the movement of Cassian Moretti's wife, from one location to another, and all of it had been quietly, efficiently disbanded sometime in the 40 minutes between Cassian's toast and the moment she reached the parking level and found her personal detail missing. The cars were still there. The men were not. She stood for a moment and understood what that meant. Then she found the keys to a vehicle she hadn't driven since the year after her daughter was born. An older model, nothing that would be tracked on anyone's manifest. And she left. She drove for an hour before she went anywhere specific. She drove the way she used to when she was young and needed to think, following the dark stretch of highway outside the city where there was no traffic, and the road curved through hills that felt like the edge of something. She had done her best thinking in moving vehicles since she was 19 years old. It was the one place she had ever felt that her mind was entirely her own. She thought about Cassian, not the Cassian of tonight, not the man who had stood in front of 300 witnesses and crowned his mistress in her place. That image she locked in a box and put away, because looking at it directly would cost her something she needed right now. She thought instead about the Cassian she had first understood, at 23, when she had looked at him across a negotiating table where she had no business being and realized he was the most dangerous man she had ever met and also the most incomplete, powerful without being wise, certain without being right. She had loved him. She had also known, even then, that loving him would require her to be more careful than he was, because when he was wrong, the consequences would fall on everyone around him. She had spent 17 years being careful. The ring. She kept returning to the ring. Not because of what it meant ceremonially. She understood that her position had been eroding for years. understood that what Cassian had done tonight was the public conclusion of a private decision made long before the ballroom. What she kept returning to was what the ring actually was, what it actually did, and whether Cassian had any idea. He didn't. She was almost certain of that. He thought it was a symbol. He thought transferring it to Celine was a gesture, dramatic, definitive, the kind of statement a man makes when he wants to rewrite history in front of witnesses. He had no idea the ring contained anything other than sentiment. Alara knew better because Cassian's grandfather had told her. She let herself sit with that for a long time. The highway unreeled in her headlights. The hills moved past in the dark. Then she took the exit toward the family's old property in the valley and began making calls. The first call was to a man named Werner, who was 71 years old, retired from the family's financial architecture after 40 years of making money disappear and reappear in ways that governments couldn't follow. Werner had not received a call from Alara in 3 years, and when he heard her voice, he didn't say hello. He said, "I wondered when." "The ring is on her finger," Alara said. A long pause. Then, "How long ago?" 2 hours. Another pause. Longer. "And the council?" No one knelt. She heard him exhale, something between a sigh and a laugh, the sound of a man watching something he'd predicted finally arrive. "Where will you be?" "The valley property." "I'll be there by morning." She hung up and made the second call, then the third. By the time she reached the long gravel drive that wound up to the old farmhouse the family had owned for 60 years and never renovated past a certain point, because some buildings are useful precisely because no one thinks to look for power inside them, she had spoken to 9 people. All of them had used the same phrase, in different ways, in different voices. All of them had said some version of, "I've been waiting." She hadn't expected that to hit her the way it did. She had to sit in the parked car for a moment, in the dark, with her hands in her lap, and absorb the weight of it. 9 people who had been waiting. 9 people who had watched the Moretti Empire and seen something no one else was supposed to see, who had actually built the empire, beneath Cassian's name, inside his shadow. And they had kept that knowledge the way you keep a key, quietly, for the door you hope you never need. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed. She had made a promise to a dying old man 7 years ago, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and carnations, while Cassian stood in the hallway taking a phone call. Domenico Moretti had been 93 years old and sharper than anyone had credited, and he had taken her hand and pressed something cold and small into her palm and told her in a voice barely above a whisper that the ring was not what it appeared to be and that the family needed a keeper and that he had chosen her before Cassian was ever made boss, before the decision had been announced to anyone, because he had watched her for 3 years and understood something his grandson hadn't learned yet. "Power is not loud," he had told her. "The loud thing is almost never the real thing." She had carried that knowledge for 7 years without using it. She had carried it through the erosion of her marriage, through Celine's arrival in Cassian's life 2 years ago, through the slow institutional drift of the organization away from her and toward a woman who didn't understand what she was standing in the middle of. She had carried it the way you carry insurance, not because you want to use it, but because the alternative is having nothing when everything goes wrong. Tonight, everything had gone wrong. She got out of the car. The old farmhouse rose against the night sky, dark and solid and unglamorous. She had always preferred it to the main estate, which was Cassian's trophy, all marble and surveillance and architectural statements. This place was different. This place was real in the way that functional things are real, built for use, not for impression. She found the hidden panel in the kitchen floor without needing a light. Her hands remembered. She lifted the access door and descended 8 steps into a room that smelled of dry paper and old steel and time. Along the walls, in locked drawers that responded only to a biometric system Domenico had installed 20 years ago and never told his son about, were the documents, the succession codes, the account architectures, the alliance agreements signed in private between the Moretti family and 3 different international networks that Cassian had inherited the benefit of without ever knowing their terms. She sat down at the old desk in the center of the room. She opened the first drawer. And Alara Moretti, the wife who had walked away from the ballroom with empty hands, the woman 300 people had watched be publicly unmade without a word of protest, began to work. Because this was always how it had worked. Not in ballrooms, not with rings and toasts and grand gestures in front of witnesses. This was where the real architecture lived, in a room underground, in a house nobody glamorous would visit, at a desk that had belonged to a man who understood that the loudest thing in any room is almost never the most dangerous one. Upstairs, across the valley, in a ballroom full of chandeliers and armed men in applause, Cassian Moretti was celebrating. He had no idea what he had just set in motion. The morning after the centennial arrived gray and cold over the valley, the kind of morning that felt like a consequence. Werner reached the farmhouse at 6:43. Ilara heard his car on the gravel and was already at the door when he came up the steps. A short, heavy-set man with white hair and the careful hands of someone who had spent decades handling things that couldn't be touched carelessly. He looked at her face and didn't offer sympathy. She had always appreciated that about him. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I haven't." "Good." He stepped inside. Sleeping would have been the wrong instinct. She poured him coffee and they sat at the kitchen table. Not the room below, not yet. And Werner opened the worn leather satchel he'd carried every day for 40 years and laid 3 folders on the table between them. No preamble, no condolences about the previous evening. That wasn't what this was. "Start with the Linden accounts," Ilara said. He looked at her. "You already know what's in the Linden accounts. I want to hear you say it out loud." Werner opened the first folder. He walked her through 11 years of financial architecture in under 20 minutes, the way a surgeon describes an operation: precise, bloodless, without sentiment. The Linden accounts were the oldest of the hidden structures, established before Cassian took the seat. Channels that moved capital across 4 jurisdictions through shell entities with no visible Moretti fingerprints. Every significant operation the syndicate had run in the last decade, the port contracts, the construction monopolies, the political infrastructure in 3 states, had been funded and protected through routes that ran, at their foundation, through Ilara's authorization. Not Cassian's, hers. He had signed things. His name was on the surface layer of everything, but the architecture beneath, the structures that made the surface layer survive. Those had been built by Ilara, piece by piece, beginning in the 2nd year of their marriage, when she had sat with Domenico and understood that the empire Cassian was inheriting had serious structural vulnerabilities his confidence would never allow him to see. She had spent 15 years quietly fixing problems her husband didn't know existed. "He's going to start pulling on things," she said. "When the orders don't move, when the transfers stall, he'll start looking for where the blockage is." "He won't find it," Werner said. "Not without you." "He'll find enough to make him dangerous." Werner closed the folder. "Then we move faster than he does." She nodded. Outside, the light was coming up gray over the valley hills. Somewhere across that distance, in the main estate that cost 3 times what this farmhouse was worth, and looked it, Cassian Moretti was probably waking up beside a woman who had his ring on her finger and no idea what she'd walked into. Ilara felt something cross her chest. Not grief. Not exactly. Something older and more complicated. The specific exhaustion of a person who has been right about something for years and taken no pleasure in being right. "Who else is coming?" Werner asked. "Magistrate Horn at 9, Capo Reyes at 11, but he won't use the front road. And Lucia Costa is flying in from Naples. She'll be here by tonight." Werner sat back. The name Lucia Costa made him straighten slightly, an involuntary respect. Lucia Costa had managed the Moretti family's international alliance network for 30 years, from a position that didn't officially exist. She was 68 years old, had survived 2 attempts on her life, and communicated exclusively through channels that predated the internet and were therefore invisible to every surveillance infrastructure currently operated by any government. "Lucia's coming herself," he said. "She called me. I didn't call her." Werner looked at his coffee cup. "Then it's already further along than I thought." "Yes," Ilara said. "It is." Across the valley, Celine Voss woke at 8 in the master suite of the Moretti estate, lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the ring on her right hand. She had moved it from her left, an instinct, a small private hedge against commitment. And now she held it up against the morning light coming through the curtains and watched the obsidian crest catch it. She had wanted this for 2 years. She had worked for it in ways that had cost her sleep and compromised things she'd once considered fixed about herself. She had told herself the cost was worth it. Looking at the ring, she believed it. What she hadn't accounted for was the silence. Even at 8 in the morning, the estate should have had a particular quality of sound. Staff moving through the corridors, security rotations, the distant administrative hum of an organization that never fully stopped. Instead, the house felt muffled. She couldn't name it exactly. It wasn't quiet, but the sounds that reached her felt wrong in some way she couldn't locate. She dressed and went downstairs and found Cassian in the study with 3 of his captains, men she recognized, men who had been at the Centennial, men whose expressions now carried something she hadn't seen in them the night before. Not hostility. Closer to the specific blankness of people being very careful about what their faces said. The DeLuca payment didn't clear, Cassian said without looking up from the papers in front of him. Meaning what? Celine asked. One of the captains, a man named Arlo Brent, thick-necked and careful, who had been with the family for 20 years, looked at her briefly and then looked back at Cassian. That look, that small redirection of attention. She'd been cataloging those since she walked in. Meaning it didn't clear, Cassian said. The transfer initiated, authorization went through, and then somewhere between here and the receiving account, it stopped. Technical issue? 3 of them in the last 6 hours aren't technical issues. Celine moved to the desk and looked at the papers. Columns of figures, account notations, routing codes she could read well enough to understand the shape of, but not the specific architecture. She had studied Moretti finances for 2 years, had learned the surface layer thoroughly, and had believed she understood the engine. Looking at these papers now, she felt a cold awareness that she had understood the dashboard but not what was under it. Pull the authorization chain, she said, because it was the right thing to say. We did, Brent said. Flat. Still not looking at her. And? He looked at Cassian instead of answering her. Cassian said, the authorization chain traces back to a structural node we don't have access to. What node? I thought we had full access. A pause that lasted too long. Cassian set the papers down and pressed both hands on the desk and looked at her for the first time since she'd walked in, and his expression was not the expression of a man who had everything under control. It was the expression of a man who had just realized the room he'd been standing in was smaller than he thought. So did I, he said. The first captain to visit Alara at the farmhouse arrived before noon. He came alone, on foot from the road, without calling ahead. A man named Reyes, who was 54 years old and had run the syndicate's Western distribution network for a decade, with a precision that made him invaluable and an independence of judgment that had always made Cassian mildly uneasy. Reyes was not a sentimental man. He didn't bring flowers or condolences. He came up the farmhouse steps and looked at Alara and said, I need to know what you're doing. Come in, she said. He sat across from her at the kitchen table. Werner had retreated to the back room. Reyes glanced at the closed door, then back at Alara. Last night was a declaration, he said. Yes. It was also a mistake. He said it without qualification, without softening. Not because of sentiment, because of structure. The people in that room, Shah, the ones who matter, they understand that the ring isn't symbolic. Cassian doesn't seem to. He doesn't know what it contains. Reyes went still. He was a man who had spent 30 years learning to control his reactions, and even so, the stillness that came over him now was its own tell. Domenico told you. 7 years ago. Then you've known, yes. He looked at the table. His jaw worked slightly. For 7 years you've known what that ring would do in the wrong hands, and you said nothing. I said nothing because there was nothing to say. Cassian was wearing it correctly. The network was stable. She met his eyes. Until last night. Reyes pushed back his chair and stood, walked to the window, stood there with his back to her. Outside, the valley was full of morning light that had finally broken through the cloud cover. Clear, sharp, illuminating. If Celine accesses the command frequency, she won't know it's there. You're sure? She'll think it's an heirloom. She'll wear it to events. She'll use it as a statement. Alara's voice stayed level. She has no idea the emergency channel is embedded in the crest architecture. No one told her, because the only people who knew were Domenico's inner circle. And Cassian? Never knew. His grandfather was protecting him from knowing. A leader who knows about the override channel becomes paranoid about it. Domenico wanted Cassian to lead without that weight. Reyes turned from the window. But now she's wearing it in public, around people we don't control, around people who have been trying to find that channel for 20 years. Alara didn't answer, because he already knew the answer. How long? He said. How long before someone figures it out? I don't know, weeks, maybe less, if the wrong person gets close enough to the ring with the right equipment. Reyes sat back down. He put both elbows on the table and pressed his hands over his face for a moment. A gesture she had never seen from him, a crack in the composure he maintained like armor. Then he lowered his hands and looked at her. What do you need from me? He said. That was the moment she knew it would hold. Not because Reyes was loyal to her, he wasn't particularly. He was loyal to the organization, to the thing itself, to the decades-long enterprise that provided for hundreds of families and ran on a kind of disciplined order that was, in its own brutal way, a form of integrity. He was here because he had done the math and understood that the organization's survival was now more closely aligned with Alara's judgment than with the man who held its public name. She told him what she needed. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once. By Thursday, he said. By Tuesday, she said. Another pause. Then, Tuesday. He left the way he came, on foot, no announcement, no visible connection to the farmhouse that anyone watching would be able to trace. The first order Celine gave that was openly ignored came at 2 in the afternoon. It concerned the security rotation at the syndicate's primary warehouse complex, a logistical facility that processed a volume of goods requiring careful handling and careful personnel. Celine had reviewed the roster and determined that 2 of the shift supervisors were men she didn't recognize, men who had not been vetted through her own network, men she therefore didn't trust. She issued the order through Cassian's administrative channel, properly formatted, properly authorized, or so she believed. By 4 o'clock, neither man had been replaced. She called the facility manager directly. A man named Ottavio, who had held that position for 9 years, answered on the second ring and listened to her repeat the order and then said, in a very polite and absolutely immovable voice, that the roster had been set under a standing operational directive that required dual authorization to modify. I'm authorizing it, Celine said. Yes, ma'am, Ottavio said. I'll need the co-authorization to process it. From whom? A brief, careful pause. That information is above my administrative level. She hung up. She stood in the center of Cassian's study. Her study now, she was trying to think of it that way, and felt a tightening in her chest that was not quite anger and not quite fear, something between the two. The specific sensation of a person who has reached for a light switch and found no wall behind it. She called 3 more facilities before evening. Each one offered a version of the same response. Polite, immovable, pointing to a layer of authorization she couldn't access. Cassian found her in the study at 7. She told him what had happened. She watched his face move through something. Irritation first, then the deliberate suppression of irritation, then something harder underneath that. I'll handle it, he said. You've been saying that since this morning. His eyes came up. Celine. 3 transfers blocked. 4 facilities non-responsive. Your security chief hasn't returned a call in 6 hours. She put her hands flat on the desk. This isn't resistance. This is systematic. I know what it is. Do you? Because it looks like the organization is running without us. It's running without you, he said, and the distinction in his voice, quiet, precise, a small blade, landed exactly where he'd aimed it. She felt the blood come into her face. The ring is on my finger. I know where the ring is. Then act like it matters. He walked to the window. His back was very straight and very still, and she had learned to read his stillness the way sailors read water, the surface calm that means something is moving hard underneath. I've sent Brent to pull the authorization architecture. We'll have the routing tomorrow. And if the routing points somewhere you didn't expect? He didn't answer. She looked at his back, at the set of his shoulders, at the man she had spent 2 years positioning herself beside, had spent 2 years believing she understood, and felt for the first time the genuine possibility that she had miscalculated something fundamental, not about his feelings, about his knowledge, about whether Cassian Moretti actually understood the machine he was supposed to be running. Cassian, she said, where did Alara go last night? He turned from the window. To the Valley property. And you're comfortable with that? She has a right to her own property. She has a right to a property that has been in the family for 60 years, that I have never been given access to. That 3 of your oldest capos apparently visit on a rotation that doesn't appear on any official schedule. She watched his face. Brent found that, at least. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences. This one had weight and edges. "When were you going to tell me?" she said. "I found out an hour ago." "And?" He said nothing for a moment, then, "I'm going to the valley tomorrow. I'm coming with you." "No," he said, immediately, without hesitation or explanation. She looked at him. He looked back at her. And in that held eye contact, she understood that whatever Cassian was afraid of finding at the valley property, he was more afraid of her being present when he found it. Brent delivered the routing report at 10 that night. Cassian read it in the study alone, with the door closed, and when he finished the first page, he set it down and pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose and stayed very still for a full minute. Then he picked it up and read the rest. The routing was not a mystery. That was the thing. It was not encrypted or hidden or disguised in ways designed to frustrate investigation. It was, in fact, perfectly clear, clear enough that reading it felt like being shown something that had always been there, something he had walked past every day for years without seeing because he hadn't known to look. Every significant financial flow in the Moretti organization traced, at some foundational level, to authorization nodes that carried Ilara's credentials. Not her name. Her biometric signature, her encryption keys, her specifically individualized access protocols. Cassian's own credentials existed in the system as a surface layer, the visible ownership structure, the thing that appeared in documents and registered with institutional contacts. But beneath it, running parallel and deeper, was a second architecture that didn't need his authorization for anything. An architecture that could, theoretically, continue to function without him entirely. He had been the face of his own empire. She had been its foundation. He set the report down on the desk and looked at his own hands. The absence of the ring on his right hand was something he'd been aware of all day, in the way you're aware of a missing tooth. Not constantly, but in recurring pulses of wrongness, a physical register of something displaced. He had given it away as a statement. He had given away what he now understood was not just a symbol. He thought about calling Ilara. He picked up the phone twice and put it down. What would he say? What was there to say that didn't begin with an admission he wasn't ready to make? Instead, he called Brent back and told him to pull everything on the valley property, visitor logs, utility records, any communications traffic that could be traced to that address in the last 18 hours. Brent called back at midnight. 11 visitors since this morning, he said. Werner Holt, Magistrate Horn from the appellate court, Reyes. A pause. And Lucia Costa landed at Westfield Private Air this evening. Ground transport took her southeast. Cassian sat with that for a moment. Lucia Costa. He had met her twice in his life, both times in the context of her being introduced as a family associate of long standing, a woman with connections in Europe he was told were valuable and should be treated with care. She had shaken his hand and looked at him with an expression he hadn't known how to read at the time and had forgotten about until now. Looking back at it from where he was sitting tonight, at midnight, with Brent's report in front of him, he thought he understood what the expression had been. She had been assessing him, deciding something. And whatever she had decided, the decision had apparently led her 20 years later to fly from Naples to spend an evening at his estranged wife's farmhouse. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hadn't felt since the early years, before the empire was fully secured, before the machine was running smoothly enough that he could believe his own authority was absolute. He felt afraid. Not of Ilara. Not exactly. More of the shape of what he was beginning to see. The outline of something enormous that had existed parallel to his entire understanding of his own life. A structure he had inhabited without knowing it. A room he had thought he built, but had only ever been allowed to stand in. He sat at his desk until 3 in the morning, reading everything Brent sent him, and with every page the picture became sharper, and the fear became something else, a harder, colder thing, because Cassian Moretti was not a man who stayed afraid for long. Fear was an input. He processed inputs and made decisions. The decision he was reaching slowly through the cold hours of that night was the wrong one. He didn't know that yet. Ilara was awake when Lucia Costa arrived. She heard the car on the gravel at 11:15 and came to the door and stood there while Lucia climbed out. A small woman, fine-boned, with white hair cut close to her head and eyes that had the particular quality of people who have paid close attention to the world for 68 years. She carried a single bag and moved without hurry. She looked at Alara for a moment without speaking. Then she said, in accented English, smooth and deliberate, "You held longer than I expected." "I held as long as I could." "Yes." Lucia came up the steps. "That is what I told them." Inside, over strong coffee that neither of them treated as anything other than fuel, Lucia laid out what she knew. The international picture. The network of alliance agreements that the Moretti family had maintained across 3 continents for 30 years. Agreements that ran beneath the visible surface of the organization, that provided protection and access and capital that no domestic operation alone could sustain. Agreements that, as Lucia explained with the careful precision of someone describing a legal document, were not registered under Cassian's name. They were registered under Ilara's. Domenico again. The old man's hand reaching across 7 years. "He was thorough," Ilara said. "He was afraid of what Cassian would do if he knew," Lucia said. "Not malicious, afraid. He loved his grandson. He understood his grandson's weakness." She turned her coffee cup in both hands. Pride. The specific pride of a man who cannot tolerate being secondary to anything. He's not secondary. He was never primary. That is different. Lucia looked at her steadily. And tonight he knows it. Not fully. He doesn't have the architecture yet. But the transfers stalled. The facilities didn't respond. He knows something is wrong with the machine, and he is intelligent enough to understand that the machine was running before he made his decision last night. She paused. What he doesn't know yet is how far it goes. When he finds out, Lucia said, he will have a choice. The same choice every man in his position faces when the thing he thought he owned turns out to be more complicated than he understood. She set the cup down. Some make the right choice. Some don't. Ilara looked at the window. Outside the valley was dark and still, the hills just visible against the slightly lighter darkness of the sky. And if he makes the wrong one? Lucia's expression didn't change. Then the ring becomes the least of your problems. She said it quietly, without drama, the way you state a fact about weather. And that was the worst of it. Not the content of the words, but the tone of someone describing something they had seen before. In other families, in other generations. The tone of a woman who had watched pride make catastrophic choices in men who should have known better, and who was not surprised, and who was here because she had decided, across 68 years of this world, that some things were worth arriving early for. Ilara nodded. She understood. She went back to the room below the kitchen at midnight and pulled the succession codes from the drawer where they had lived for 7 years, unused, and began the sequence that Domenico had walked her through in that hospital room. The process that would, when completed, formally register the transfer of the keeper authority from dormant to active status, making it visible to every node in the network that knew to look for it. She had resisted beginning this sequence all day. She began it now because of something Lucia had said, not the words about Cassian's choice, but something earlier, something almost offhand, a mention of a name that Ilara had heard before in a context she hadn't fully understood at the time. Volkov. Lucia had said the name while describing the international picture. She had placed it carefully, without emphasis, in the middle of a longer description, the way you place a small explosive in a sentence and keep walking. Volkov was not a Moretti ally. Volkov was the name attached to a network that had spent 20 years looking for vulnerabilities in families exactly like this one. Families with hidden architectures, families whose authority structures had soft centers, families where a single destabilizing event could crack the whole thing open and let outside money pour in through the fracture. Someone had been feeding Volkov information. Someone had told them about the centennial, about the ring, about the specific moment when a destabilized Moretti leadership might be most vulnerable to pressure. Ilara sat very still at the desk below the farmhouse kitchen and thought about who had known all 3 of those things: the centennial timeline, the ring's role in the command network, the state of her marriage, and the answer she arrived at made her stop breathing for a moment. Not Cassian's enemies, not a rival family, not a disgruntled captain with a grievance, someone much closer than any of that. She reached for her phone and called Werner in the back bedroom, and when he answered, she said one sentence: Pull everything we have on Celine Voss before she came to Cashin. Werner was quiet for 2 seconds. How far back? To the beginning, Ilara said. Wherever that actually is. She hung up, looked at the succession codes in front of her, understood that the thing she had spent the last 24 hours thinking of as a marriage crisis was something else entirely, larger, more deliberate, more dangerous, and that the woman sleeping upstairs in Cashin's bed was not a romantic rival who had overreached. She was the point of entry. Werner came back to her at 2 a.m. with a single printed page and a look on his face she had never seen from him before. Not fear. Werner didn't do fear, but something adjacent to it, the expression of a man who has opened a wall, expecting insulation and found load-bearing structure he didn't know was there. He set the page on the desk in front of her without speaking. She read it. Then she read it again because the first reading hadn't fully landed. The information was there, her eyes had processed it, but the meaning had arrived in pieces the way bad news always does. The mind running slightly behind the facts, trying to catch up. Celine Voss had not existed before 9 years ago. Not in any documentable sense. The name appeared in records beginning 9 years and 4 months ago. A driver's license issued in Nevada, a lease agreement in Las Vegas, a bank account opened with a modest deposit, a social security number that traced to a woman who had died in Ohio at age 3 months. The infrastructure of a person built from scratch, competently but not flawlessly, by someone who understood documentation and had access to the tools required to produce it. Before that, nothing. Ilara set the page down flat on the desk. She pressed her fingertips against it as though the physical pressure would help her think. Her breath was coming slower than usual, a thing she noticed the way you notice your own heartbeat when it changes rhythm. Not the breathing itself, but the deliberate quality of it. Her body working to stay regulated while her mind processed something it found destabilizing. 9 years ago. Celine appeared 9 years ago. Cashin and Celine had been together for 2 years. That left 7 years of a constructed identity spent in proximity to a world Celine had been preparing to enter. 7 years of positioning. 7 years of building the person who would eventually stand close enough to the ring to take it. Where did the trail go when you pushed back past the Nevada origin? She asked. Werner sat down across from her. A payments trail in Eastern European currencies. Converted, routed, cleaned. But the origin point, if I'm reading the architecture correctly, he stopped. Werner. Volkov adjacent infrastructure, he said. Not Volkov directly. One layer removed, but the methodology is identical. Same document construction pattern, same identity burial technique. Ilara looked at the page again. She was aware of Lucia's presence somewhere in the house. The older woman had gone to the small back bedroom 2 hours ago, had told Ilara to wake her if the Werner search produced anything, had said it in a tone that suggested she expected it would. That expectation now felt like its own revelation. How much had Lucia known when she arrived? How long had she been watching this approach from Naples? Those questions could wait. The messages, Ilara said. Cashin showed me 3 of them, 2 years ago, when things started changing between us. Messages that appeared to come from my accounts, from my private line, that I didn't send. She looked at Werner. I told him they weren't mine. He didn't believe me. I stopped arguing because arguing about it made me look guilty. She paused. Pull my archived communication logs. The originating server data, not the message content. I want to know where those messages actually came from. That will take until morning. Then start now. He left. She sat alone in the underground room with the succession codes half completed in front of her and Celine Voss's constructed life story on a single page beside them. And she allowed herself exactly 60 seconds of something that wasn't quite rage and wasn't quite grief. A compound feeling for which she didn't have a precise word, the feeling of understanding, all at once, the full shape of what had been done to her. Not just the ring, not just the centennial, the whole of it, the slow erosion of her marriage, the widening distance from Cassian, the specific moments when she had felt most alone and most doubted, all of it reframing itself now around the presence of a woman who had been placed there deliberately to produce exactly those results. 60 seconds. Then she picked up the pen and continued the succession sequence. Cassian arrived at the Valley farmhouse at 9 in the morning. He came with 2 men, not Brent, 2 others she didn't recognize by face, which told her he'd pulled security from a level of the organization she didn't have current visibility into. He came in a vehicle that wasn't in the estate's official fleet. He was being careful. He was being, she recognized with something complicated, intelligently careful, which meant some part of him understood that the normal channels were compromised in ways he hadn't yet mapped. She was standing on the porch when he came up the drive. She had known he was coming. Reyes had sent a 3-word message at 8:45, and she had considered not being visible, letting him knock, making him wait. She had decided against it. This conversation had been 17 years in the making. She was not going to hide from it. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at her. He was wearing what he wore when he wanted to project that he wasn't trying to project anything. Dark clothes, no visible insignia, the deliberate understatement of a powerful man trying to appear like a private one. His face was the face of a man who had not slept and had spent the sleepless hours getting harder rather than softer, the jaw set, the eyes carrying something that on a less controlled man would have been raw. "You want to come in?" she said. "I want to talk." "That's what I said." He came up the steps. She stepped aside. He walked past her into the kitchen and stood in the center of it and turned, taking in the room, the table, the chairs, the coffee on the stove, the perfectly ordinary surface of a farmhouse kitchen that did not advertise anything of what was 3 steps below their feet. His eyes moved across it all, and she watched him file the observations away. "Sit down, Cassie." "I'll stand." She sat. She poured herself coffee, both hands steady. He watched her hands. "Werner Holt was here yesterday," he said. "Yes." "Magistrate Horn." "Yes." "Reyes." "And Lucia Costa, who hasn't set foot in this country in 4 years." He said the last name with a particular weight, like a card placed deliberately on a table. "You want to tell me what that meeting was about?" "Which meeting?" "There were several." His jaw tightened. "Don't do that." "I'm asking a real question. You're framing this as one meeting when it was a sequence of conversations. The framing matters." "Elara." His voice dropped. Not softening, the opposite. Going lower and quieter the way a pressure valve sounds right before it gives. "I read the routing architecture last night. I know what the Linden accounts are. I know what they mean about the authorization structure." She looked at him over her coffee cup. "I want to know why," he said. "Not how. I understand the how. Domenico built it. You managed it. I want to know why you never told me." "Your grandfather asked me not to." "He's been dead for 7 years." "Yes." 7 years, Elara. 7 years you've been sitting on this. 7 years you didn't need it," she said. "The organization was running. The alliances were holding. There was no crisis that required activating any of it. What would telling you have accomplished?" He stared at her. Something moved across his face. The thing he was trying not to say. The real question under the question he'd asked. She could see him deciding whether to say it. He said it. "Did you ever actually trust me to run this family? Or was I always just the face you stood behind?" The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a bird was making noise in the eaves, a small, irrelevant, persistently ordinary sound. "I trusted you," she said. "That's why I held everything in reserve instead of using it. That's not trust, that's control. It's insurance. There's a difference. From where I'm standing, there isn't." He turned away, moved to the window, turned back. The 2 men he'd brought were outside. She could see one of them through the glass, standing by the car, not looking at the house. "You built a parallel structure inside my organization, inside your grandfather's organization, which he asked me to protect. And you ran it for 17 years without telling me it existed, and you want to call that a marriage?" She set the cup down. "I want to call it what saved your life 3 times that you're not aware of." Her voice was still level, but it had changed in some specific way. She let it change, something coming into it that she usually kept contained. "The DeLuca escalation in 2019, I rerouted the capital before it hit the pressure point. You thought it resolved itself. It didn't resolve itself. The federal pressure in 21, Magistrate Horn called me, not you, because he knew I was the one who could actually move the circuit. And the Petrov approach 2 years ago, the ones that looked like a business proposition and was actually a soft acquisition attempt. Lucia flagged it. I killed it before it reached your desk." She looked at him directly. 3 times, not because I didn't trust you, because I was faster, and being faster kept you alive. And the cost of explaining all of it in real time was slower than just handling it. I was looking at her with an expression she could not fully read, layers, contradictions, the face of a man absorbing something that cost him something he wasn't ready to give. "You should have told me," he said. "You should have asked," she said. "You never asked, Cassian. In 17 years, not once did you sit down and say, 'How does this actually work? What am I not seeing? What are you carrying that I don't know about?' You didn't ask because you didn't want to know." Knowing would have required you to acknowledge that the empire was more complicated than your authority over it. The silence stretched. Then, "I came here to tell you I want the authorization codes." "I know." "The Linden architecture, the succession nodes, whatever Lucia brought from Naples. I know what you came for." "Then give it to me." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she said the thing she had worked out in the underground room at 4 in the morning, alone, after Werner's results, after the full shape of the situation had resolved itself into clarity. "I can't give you the codes," she said, "not because I'm withholding them from you, because they won't respond to you. The biometric architecture is keyed to me, and changing that requires a process that takes 72 hours minimum, and we don't have 72 hours. He went very still. "Why not?" She stood. She crossed to the counter and picked up the single printed page Werner had left and held it out to him. He took it. He read it. She watched his face. She watched the moment he understood what he was reading, not the documentation details. Those took a moment to parse, but the implication. The constructed identity. The Eastern European payments infrastructure. The Volkov-adjacent methodology. She watched him put it together piece by piece, watched the moment the pieces connected into a shape he recognized, and then watched the color leave his face in a way that was not dramatic, not cinematic, just biological. Blood redirecting, the body responding to information the mind had just classified as threat. "When did you know?" he said. "Last night." "And before that?" "I suspected something was wrong with how our marriage was breaking down. I didn't know the mechanism." He looked at the page again. His hand was not entirely steady. "The messages. The ones I showed you. The ones from your accounts. Forged. Werner is pulling the originating server data now. We'll have confirmation by afternoon." He sat down. For the first time in the conversation, for possibly the first time she had seen in years, Cassian Moretti sat down because his legs made the decision for him. "She was placed," he said. Not a question. "Yes. By Volkov. By someone connected to Volkov's network. We don't have the direct link yet. To get to the ring." He said it slowly, each word separate, a man walking carefully across ice. "She was put here to get to the ring, and to destabilize the family from inside. Both things together. The personal disruption and the physical access to the command network. One creates the vulnerability, the other exploits it." He put the page down on the table. He pressed both palms flat against the surface and looked at his own hands for a moment. The right hand, where the ring should have been, where the ring wasn't. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Before Volkov knows the ring is on her finger? If they don't already know, they know soon. The moment she wears it in proximity to anyone running a frequency scanner." She stopped. "Werner thinks it may have already happened. There was an anomalous signal pulled from the Centennial venue at approximately the time of your toast." His head came up. "Last night," she said. "The moment the ring transferred to her in public, in a room full of people, someone there with the right equipment may have captured enough of the crest signal to begin mapping the channel architecture." The bird in the eaves had gone quiet. The kitchen was absolutely still. "You're telling me," Cassian said very slowly, "that within hours of me putting that ring on her finger, in front of every captain and every ally the family has, someone in that room pulled the emergency command frequency. I'm telling you it's possible. Werner will know by noon." He stood. He turned away from her, both hands coming up to the back of his neck, the posture of a man who needed a wall to put his back against and couldn't find one. "And if they did, if they have the signal, what does that mean? It means every hidden channel in the family's emergency network is potentially exposed. It means Volkov's people can listen to anything transmitted on those frequencies, or block them. It means the command architecture we would use in a crisis response is compromised before any crisis even begins." He turned back to her. "Is there a backup?" "Yes. But accessing it requires Your codes. Yes. He looked at her. She looked at him. The distance between them across the kitchen table was 6 feet and 17 years, and a constructed woman upstairs in his estate, who had been placed there by people who had understood, better than either of them, exactly where the fault lines ran. "What do you need from me?" he said. His voice had changed. The hardness was still there, but the direction of it had shifted. It had been pointing at her when he arrived. It was pointing somewhere else now. "I need you to go back to the estate and act like nothing has changed. Don't confront Celine. Don't change her access. Don't alter her security arrangements. Don't do anything that signals you know what she is. If Volkov's people are watching, and they are watching, the moment you move on her, they move on us." His jaw worked. "You want me to go back and I want you to go back and have dinner with her and let her wear the ring for 36 more hours while I complete the succession sequence and Werner locates the originating transmission from last night, and Lucia activates the Naples contacts to identify who Volkov used inside the Centennial venue." The expression on his face was something she had no category for. She had seen Cassian angry, had seen him cold, had seen him at his most dangerous and his most tender, had 17 years of his face as a reference library. This expression was new. It was the expression of a man being asked to do the thing that was most precisely against his nature and understanding, with precision that he had no alternative. "She's in my house," he said. Quiet. Very controlled. "Yes." She has been in my house for 2 years." "Yes." He stopped. He pressed his hand over his mouth for a moment, then lowered it. "She forged your messages. She made me believe you were—" He stopped again. "I told you I didn't believe you. When you said they weren't yours, I told you I didn't believe you." Alara said nothing. "Alara." "Cassian, don't." "I need to say, not now." Her voice was not harsh. It was the voice she used when sentiment was a luxury the moment couldn't afford. "There will be time for that conversation. Right now I need you functional, and that conversation will not leave you functional. Put it away." He looked at her for a long moment. Something passed across his face, gratitude and resentment and grief all at once, a complicated knot of things that had no clean way out. Then he nodded. A single, controlled movement. He picked up the page from the table and folded it and put it in his jacket pocket. 36 hours, he said. Maybe less if Werner moves fast. And if Celine realizes something's wrong. She's been managing your reactions for 2 years. She'll believe what you give her to believe. You're better at controlled performance than you think. Something that was almost a sound, not a laugh, but the ghost of one, dark and private, moved through him. That's a terrible thing to say. It's useful. That's what matters right now. He moved toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame, didn't turn around. "The ring," he said. "If it's already broadcasting, if Volkov already has the frequency, is there anything left to save?" She had thought about this question at 4 in the morning. She had thought about it carefully, without sentiment, the way Domenico had taught her to think about terminal problems. Not whether to save the patient, but which organ to preserve when you couldn't save all of them. "The command network itself isn't the empire," she said. "The empire is the people. The captains who came here yesterday. The alliances Lucia holds. The financial architecture Werner knows by memory." She paused. "Volkov can capture a signal. They can't capture what lives in the minds of people who are loyal to the structure, not to the frequency." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "But they can hurt us badly." "Yes," she said. "They can hurt us badly." He left. She heard his car on the gravel. She stood in the kitchen and listened to it fade down the road. Then she went to the door of the back bedroom and knocked. Lucia opened it immediately. She had not been sleeping. "He's going back," Elara said. Lucia nodded. "And Celine?" "Still in place. We have 36 hours if nothing breaks early." She looked at the older woman. "There's something I need to ask you directly. Something I should have asked when you first called me." Lucia's expression didn't change. She waited. "You called me before the centennial, not after. Before." Elara held the older woman's gaze. "You called me 4 days before the centennial and told me to be careful at the event. You didn't say why. You didn't say what you knew." She paused. "What did you know, Lucia? And how long had you known it?" The silence in this farmhouse was absolute. Outside, the valley was bright and ordinary and indifferent. Inside, in the narrow hallway between a back bedroom and a kitchen, two women looked at each other, and Alara watched the careful deliberation move across Lucia Costa's face, the face of a woman deciding, for the first time in a long conversation, how much of the truth the moment actually required. "Longer than I should have waited to tell you," Lucia said. The air went out of the hallway. "How long?" Alara said. Not a question. A blade. Lucia closed her eyes briefly. 14 months. 14 months. Alara felt the number move through her the way a body absorbs impact. The specific total body quality of a blow landed cleanly. 14 months ago, she had still believed her marriage was salvageable. 14 months ago, she had sat across from Cassian in a restaurant and tried to talk about what was happening between them, and he had been distant, and she had come home and cried in the bathroom with the door locked. And she had not known that what was being done to her marriage was being watched from Naples by a woman who had weighed the information against some other calculation and kept it. "Why didn't you tell me?" The words came out in a register she couldn't fully control, not loud, but not contained either. Raw in a way that surprised her. "Lucia, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't know if you were clean," Lucia said. The hallway went cold. "I received intelligence that Volkov had placed an asset inside the Moretti family," Lucia said, and her voice was measured, careful, the voice of someone delivering a prepared statement to someone they respect enough to be honest with. The intelligence didn't specify who. It specified the family. "I spent 8 months trying to determine whether the asset was Celine or whether the asset was you." Alara stared at her. "You had access. You had motive. A deteriorating marriage, a declining position. You had the architecture knowledge to be valuable to an outside network." Lucia met her eyes without flinching. "I had to be certain. I could not come to you until I was certain." "And when did you become certain?" 6 weeks ago. The originating payment trail that Werner pulled tonight, I found it 6 weeks ago. It excluded you definitively. 6 weeks ago. Ilara's voice was very quiet now. "And you waited for the centennial." "I wanted to see if Cassian would make the transfer. If he didn't, if the ring stayed on his finger, the activation risk was contained. I was hoping he wouldn't." A pause. "He did." Alara turned away. She walked 3 steps into the kitchen and stood at the counter with her back to Lucia and pressed her hands flat on the cold surface and breathed, in, out. The deliberate mechanical breathing of a person who has absorbed 2 large things in rapid succession and is choosing, consciously, to remain standing. 14 months. 8 months of being investigated. 6 weeks of confirmed knowledge withheld. She thought about what she could afford to feel right now and what she couldn't, and she performed the triage with the ruthlessness that the last 24 hours had sharpened in her to something almost surgical. She turned back to Lucia. "Werner will have the transmission data by noon," she said. Her voice was steady. "When he does, I need you to take it to your Naples contact and get me the identity of the person inside the Centennial venue within 12 hours, not 24. 12. She held the older woman's gaze. "Can you do that?" "Yes," Lucia said. "Then do it." She turned back to the kitchen. "And Lucia," she didn't turn around. "We are not finished with the other conversation." "I know," Lucia said. "I didn't expect we would be." Alara walked to the door to the underground room and opened it and descended the 8 steps and sat down at Domenico's old desk. And she did not let herself think about 14 months or 8 months or 6 weeks. She thought about the succession sequence, about what remained to be completed, about the 72 hours that had already begun counting down. And she thought about a woman asleep in her husband's house who had been built by other people for a specific purpose. And she thought about the ring on that woman's finger and what was broadcasting from it into the dark. Then Werner's phone rang in the back bedroom. She heard him answer it. She heard the quality of his voice change, short, sharp, the sound of a man receiving news he had been hoping not to receive. He came to the top of the stairs. "Alara." His voice was tight. "The Centennial venue transmission. I have the data." She looked up at him. "It wasn't a scanner," he said. "It was a direct handshake. Someone in that room had a receiver already tuned to the crest frequency. which means they had the channel architecture before the Centennial. He stopped. Which means the ring's emergency network was already mapped before Cassian transferred it. She sat very still. They didn't need the Centennial, Werner said. The Centennial was a trigger, something to force a public transfer, to get the ring off Cassian's hand and into a position they could control. He pressed his hand against the door frame. They've had the network access for months, Ilara. They were just waiting for the right moment to use it. In the silence that followed, she understood the full geometry of what had been built against them. Not a theft, not an opportunistic attack, but something patient, architecturally sophisticated, something that had been constructed over years with the specific knowledge of how this family worked from the inside. Someone who understood the family from the inside. She looked at Werner. "The 12 people," she said. "The 12 people who knew about the crest frequency and the command network, besides me and Domenico." She had compiled the list at midnight, pulled their movement and communication records for the last 18 months. Werner already had his phone out. "All 12, she said, starting with the one we'd least expect. The name came back at 11:47 in the morning. Werner stood at the top of the stairs with his phone in his hand and read it to her, and she felt something happen in her chest that was not quite pain and not quite recognition, but somewhere between the two. The specific bodily response of a person who has suspected something and been hoping to be wrong and is not wrong. The name was Aldrich Horn, Magistrate Aldrich Horn, who had sat at her kitchen table less than 24 hours ago. Who had come to the farmhouse on foot, through the side path, the way trusted people came. Who had been inside the Moretti family's protected circle for 22 years. Who had provided judicial cover and early warning on federal movements, and who had, at 3 critical junctures in the organization's history, made calls that had protected the family from institutional pressure. It could not have survived otherwise. Who had sat across from her yesterday morning and drunk her coffee and said, "Whatever you need." She sat with the name for 15 seconds. Werner waited at the top of the stairs, watching her. "How certain," she said. "Communication records place him in contact with a Volkov network relay 18 months ago, 9 months ago, and 6 weeks ago. The 6-week contact was 48 hours before Lucia called you." 48 hours before Lucia called her. Which meant Horn had known Lucia was moving, had known the Naples network was closing in on the truth, and had not run, had instead accelerated, had come to the Centennial, had been in that room when the ring transferred. "He was at the Centennial," she said. "Front row. Judiciary table." With the receiver already tuned, she heard her own voice from a distance, calm, which surprised her, the way calm surprises you when you expected to feel something louder. "He's been feeding them the architecture for 18 months, not just the frequency, the whole structural picture, the Linden accounts, the succession codes, the alliance network." She looked at Werner. "Lucia." Werner understood immediately. "You think Horn knew about Lucia's investigation?" "He knew she was moving 6 weeks ago. That means he's known everything Lucia knows, possibly before she knew it." She stood. "Which means Volkov has had a map of our entire defensive architecture for at least 6 weeks. Not just the ring signal, all of it." She came up the stairs. "Where's Horn now?" Werner checked his phone. "His car left the city at 7 this morning. Last tracked position was 40 minutes east of here." 40 minutes east. Coming toward the valley, or already past it. "He's not coming back here," she said. "He knows we'd pull the records. He's running." She moved to the kitchen counter and picked up her phone. "Call Reyes. Tell him to put people on the Eastern Highway approach, every exit between here and the state line. I want Horn contained, not confronted. Contained." "And Cassian?" She was already dialing. "I'll tell him myself." Cassian picked up on the first ring, which told her he'd been holding the phone. "Horn," she said, a silence. Then, "Say that again." "Aldrich Horn is the inside source. 18 months of contact with Volkov infrastructure. He was at the Centennial with active receiving equipment. He's been running east since 7 this morning." The silence on the other end had a specific quality. The silence of a man processing information while standing very still. The silence of controlled violence looking for a direction to move. "He was at my grandfather's funeral," Cassian said. His voice was very quiet. "I know." "He was at my ascension. He sat at my right hand for—" "Cassian," she kept her voice level. "I need you to listen to me, not react. Listen. A breath. I'm listening. Celine doesn't know yet that we know about Horn. She may not even know Horn was her handlers, and assets at her level are usually compartmentalized. But when Horn surfaces to Volkov and reports that his cover is blown, they will move. Fast. Whatever the next phase of the operation is, they will accelerate it. What's the next phase? I don't know yet, but the command network is exposed. If they use it to broadcast false orders to the captains, if they push signals through the emergency channels that appear to come from legitimate Moretti authority, they can create chaos we can't control from outside. They can make captains think they're responding to real commands while actually walking into ambushes. They can drain accounts before anyone realizes the transfer orders are fraudulent. She paused. We have a window, small one, before Horn contacts them and they pivot. How small? Hours, not days. Another silence. She could hear him breathing, steady, the deliberate steadiness of a man who had decided to be functional. What do you need me to do? I need the ring back. The words sat in the air between them on the phone line. Ilara, I know what I'm asking. I know exactly how it looks. I don't care how it looks. Without the ring physically in my possession, I cannot complete the succession sequence, and without the succession sequence active, the backup command network stays locked. If Volkov pushes signals through the compromised primary network, we have no counter channel. We have nothing. Her grip on the phone was tighter than she meant it to be. Get me the ring, Cassian. The sound on the line was not quite a laugh and not quite something else. She's not going to hand it over. Then you need to take it. And when she calls her handlers, she will. That's expected. By the time she calls, I need the sequence complete. She checked her watch. You have 2 hours. After 2 hours, Horn will have reached a position where he can communicate safely, and when he does, any advantage we have evaporates. She heard him move, a shift, footsteps, the creak of the estate's old floorboards that she knew as well as her own breathing. Where are you in the sequence? He asked. 80%. I need the ring to complete the final authentication. If I bring it to you, drive directly here. No detours. Don't use the main road. I know the valley roads. Then use them. She stopped. Then, Cassian, when you take the ring, don't give her a reason to be afraid. Don't give her a reason to make a call before you're clear of the estate. A pause. You want me to be gentle about it. I want you to be smart about it. There's a difference. The line went quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had descended into something lower, more controlled, the register he used when he was building a particular kind of focused calm from the inside out. 2 hours, he said. 2 hours, she said. She hung up. She looked at Werner. Get Reyes on the highway. And call Lucia. I need to know if her Naples contact has the venue identification yet. We need the full picture before Cassian arrives. Across the valley, in the estate's East Wing sitting room, Celine Voss was on the phone. She had been on the phone for 3 minutes, speaking in a low voice to a number that would not appear on any record, and the conversation was going in a direction she hadn't expected when she placed the call. She had expected reassurance. She was not receiving reassurance. The Horn situation has moved, the voice on the other end said. Accented English, precise, without warmth. You need to accelerate your timeline. My timeline is contingent on, your timeline is whatever we tell you it is. Flat, unmovable. The woman at the Valley property has begun the succession sequence. If she completes it, the backup network activates and everything we've built access to becomes inaccessible. Celine's hand tightened on the phone. She stood at the window of the sitting room and looked out at the estate's grounds. The manicured hedges, the security patrol moving in its rotation, the ordinary surface of a morning that felt increasingly unordinary. How do you know about the succession sequence? We've known about it for 6 weeks. A pause that she felt as a small, cold shock. Horn confirmed the architecture. 6 weeks. 6 weeks they had known and hadn't told her. She felt the specific betrayal of someone who realizes they have been operated rather than partnered. The assets version of what Ilara had felt in a different form. The discovery that the people you believed you were working with have been managing you as a piece, not consulting you as a person. She absorbed it, filed it. What do you need from me? The ring cannot stay where it is. If Cassian takes it back to her, he won't. He was at the Valley property this morning. She turned from the window. What? 2 hours ago. He drove himself, 2 security men. He was inside for 40 minutes. The blood in her face went somewhere else. She stood completely still for a moment, one hand on the phone, one hand pressed flat against the window glass, and felt the architecture of the last 2 years shift beneath her. The careful construction of trust and dependency and belief she had built in Cassian Moretti rearranging itself into a shape that meant something different than she had believed. He knows, she said. Possibly. We don't have confirmation. He went to her, this morning, alone. Her voice came out even, which surprised her. He knows. Then the timeline is now. A pause. The ring needs to leave the estate within the hour. We have transport positioned. You want me to run? We want the ring in our possession before she completes the sequence. And me? The pause that followed was 2 seconds long. In the context of this conversation, 2 seconds was a geological age. In those 2 seconds, Celine Voss understood, with perfect clarity, the complete picture of her position, what she was to these people, what she had always been, what the ring was and what she was not, and what happened to operational assets when the operation moved past the phase that required them. You'll be taken care of, the voice said. That's not an answer. It's the only one available right now. We need the ring, Celine. 1 hour. The line went dead. She stood at the window for 4 seconds. Then she moved. Cassian found her in the master bedroom with a bag open on the bed. He stood in the doorway and looked at the bag and looked at her and felt the last remaining structure of what he had believed about the last 2 years complete its collapse. Not dramatically, not in a rush of emotion, but with the quiet finality of a building that has been undermined long enough finally settling into itself. She saw him in the doorway and went very still. Going somewhere, he said. Her hand was on the bag. The ring was on her right hand. He could see it from the doorway. The black crest, the obsidian set, the thing he had removed from his own body 40 hours ago in front of 300 people as a statement of absolute confidence. And the absurdity of that confidence hit him now with a physical quality, something in his sternum. Cassian, she said. Her voice was the voice she used when she was recalibrating. He could identify it now, the slight adjustment in pitch, the reaching for the register that had always worked on him. There's something I need to tell you. Take the ring off, he said. She looked at his face. Whatever she found there made the recalibrating voice stop. Let me explain. Celine. He walked into the room, not fast, deliberate. The way he moved when he needed to project absolute certainty and had learned that certainty moves slower than panic. I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'm not going to say it again. Take the ring off and put it on the bed. You don't understand I understand that Aldrich Horn has been running you for 18 months on behalf of a network that has spent 2 years positioning you inside this house to access a command channel in that ring that you don't know exists and that you've been broadcasting to people who will cut you loose the moment they have what they need. He stopped 6 feet from her. I understand that the woman in the Valley farmhouse figured that out last night while you were sleeping in my bed, and that she called me at 7 this morning, and that the meeting I had with you after breakfast, where I told you everything was fine, a small, cold pause, was not me believing everything was fine. The color had left her face in stages while he spoke. She stood at the foot of the bed with her hand on the open bag and her chest moving with breathing that was working harder than she wanted it to. And he watched her process the information the way an intelligent person processes a reversal, quickly, functionally, looking for the part of it that was still operable. He saw the moment she found it. She moved toward the door. He was faster. Not by much. She was faster than most people expected, and she had clearly planned for this possibility. But enough. He stepped into the doorway and she stopped 2 feet from him, and they stood there for a moment, and the air between them had nothing left in it of what had been between them for 2 years. Nothing at all. Just the bare stripped fact of 2 people on opposite sides of something. They'll kill me, she said. If I don't deliver, I know. Then you understand why I understand exactly what you need. I also need something. He held out his hand. The ring. And then we have a conversation about what you know about Volkov's operational timeline. And in exchange for that conversation, I make a call that keeps you alive past this afternoon. She looked at his hand, then at his face. How do I know you'll actually make the call? She said. You don't, he said. That's the offer. The seconds moved through the room like something physical. Slow, heavy, each one costing something. He watched her calculate, watched her work through the options she had left, which were narrowing as she counted them, and watched her arrive at the place he needed her to arrive. She pulled the ring from her finger and placed it in his palm. It was heavier than he remembered. He mowed the valley in 40 minutes, pushing the car harder than was safe on the winding roads, both hands on the wheel, the ring in his jacket pocket where he could feel it against his ribs with every turn. The two security men in the follow car kept pace. He didn't think about Celine in the estate with three of his most trusted staff maintaining what amounted to a polite containment. He didn't think about what she had told him in the 20 minutes after the ring changed hands. The operational details she had given him in a voice stripped of everything except the specific pragmatism of a person trading information for survival. He thought about Alara. He thought about a message he had received 2 years ago from an account he believed was hers that said, "I don't think I love you anymore, and I don't think I have for a long time." He had read that message standing in an airport in Chicago, and something had happened inside him that he had never fully described to anyone, a kind of structural failure, a thing giving way that he had not known was load-bearing. He had believed it because it arrived in her voice, in her syntax, with the specific emotional precision she used when she was being honest in ways that cost her. He had believed it, and he had not confronted her directly, had let it calcify instead into distance, into the slow withdrawal that Celine had then moved into and occupied. A forged message in her voice, her syntax, her precision. Someone had studied her carefully enough to replicate the specific way she wrote when she was hurting. He pressed the accelerator. She was at the door when he came up the steps. She looked at his face first, always his face, reading it the way she always had, and then at his jacket pocket. He reached in and held the ring out, and she took it without ceremony, no pause, no acknowledgement of what it had cost him to get it back. That was exactly right. That was her. No sentiment where there was work to do, no performance of emotion when the emotion would still be there later and the work would not. She turned and went inside, and he followed, and they went down the 8 steps into the room below the kitchen, and she sat at Domenico's desk and placed the ring in a reader he didn't recognize. A small device, old, the kind of hardware that predated everything currently manufactured, that looked like something from a different era of the organization's technical history. "Don't talk for 2 minutes," she said. He didn't talk. She worked. He stood behind her and watched her hands move across the device and the old keyboard beside it, entering sequences from memory, not from notes, which meant she had memorized the full succession protocol years ago and held it ready in the way you hold something you hope you never need and cannot afford to forget. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was audible in the quiet room. Not labored, just present, the breath of focused effort. Werner appeared at the top of the stairs. "Lucia has the venue ID." "Not now," Ilara said, flat, not looking up. Werner retreated. 90 seconds, 2 minutes. A third minute in which the device made no sound and she typed nothing, simply waited. And the waiting had the quality of watching something either take hold or fail. Then a sound, low, almost subsonic, a frequency more felt than heard, and a green indicator on the device that he didn't know the meaning of, but which made Ilara's shoulders drop exactly half an inch. The succession sequence was complete. She sat for a moment without moving. Then she reached up and rubbed the back of her neck with one hand, a gesture so ordinary and so tired that it landed in his chest like something physical. "The backup network is active," she said. "Every captain connected to the emergency channel now has a verified signal from the Keeper Authority. The primary network, the compromised one, has been isolated." She turned to look at him. Her face was exhausted in a way that she wasn't trying to conceal. "Volkov can push whatever they want through the old channels. It'll arrive to empty rooms." He let out a breath he had been holding in some form for the last 2 hours. "Werner!" she called. He reappeared at the top of the stairs immediately. Lucia's contact identified the venue operative. A man named Ferris, private security contractor, hired through a hospitality shell company 6 weeks ago to work the Centennial catering coordination. He looked at a note in his hand. "Ferris is currently at an address in the warehouse district, and—" He paused, the hesitation of someone delivering the part that complicates the picture. "He's not alone." Lucia's contact says there are 8 additional Volkov personnel at that address, armed, and they've been there since this morning. Ilara looked at Cassian. Cassian looked at the stairs, then back at her. They didn't wait for Horn's report, he said. They were already moving. The Centennial transmission was enough. They didn't need Horn to confirm the sequence was activated. They were watching the frequency. She stood. If our backup network going active registered on their equipment, they know the window is closing. Then they moved tonight. Cassian's voice had gone to the place it went when the calculation was complete and the decision was made. They use whatever they captured from the primary network while it's still worth using. False orders, account draws. Hit the captains before the new signal establishes loyalty. That's what Celine told you. He looked at her. She gave me the target list, the captains they've been planning to isolate. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the other thing he'd taken from the conversation with Celine, a folded paper, handwritten, the name she had given him in exchange for his phone call. He put it on the desk. Ilara looked at the list. 7 names. She recognized all of them. These 7 get hit first, she said. Tonight. She said midnight, but with the timeline accelerated. Earlier. She picked up her phone and was already dialing Reyes before she finished the sentence. When he picked up, she read him 4 of the names and said, "Personal contact only, no electronic communication. Get to them in person and tell them the primary channel is compromised. New authorization comes only through the keeper frequency. They'll know what that means because the signal is already registering on their emergency receivers. Go now." She hung up, dialed again. 3 more names to a different contact. Then she looked at Cassian. "The warehouse," she said. "Yes." "You can't go in with the people you brought." "I know. I need Reyes." "Reyes is covering the 7. You need Brent." He shook his head. "Brent. Brent is clean. Werner confirmed it this morning. He's not on the Horn communication records." She held his gaze. "He's been your man for 20 years. Use him." A beat. Then Cassian nodded. He pulled out his phone and called Brent and spoke for 45 seconds in a voice that left no interpretation open, that communicated target and timeline and expectation with the economy of a man who had done this before and didn't need elaboration. When he hung up, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize, not quite what she expected, which was the cold operational focus, but something alongside it, something that kept reaching the surface and being pushed back down. "What?" she said. "Nothing." He moved toward the stairs. "Cassian." He stopped. "The list Celine gave you, the 7 captains." She looked at the paper on the desk. "She didn't have to give you that. She could have given you names that didn't matter and bought herself time." "I know. The information is accurate. I recognize the operational logic. These are the 7 most independent captains, the ones who would be hardest to bring back once the false orders ran. Whoever planned this understood the family structure." She paused. "Which means Celine understood it. She wasn't just a courier. She had genuine operational knowledge of this organization." He stood on the second stair with one hand on the wall. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying she may have given us accurate information because she's genuinely afraid, or she may have given us accurate information because the accurate information still serves a purpose we haven't identified." She met his eyes. "Don't trust it without verification. Don't send Brent to the warehouse on Celine's word alone." He was quiet for 3 seconds. "Werner, can you verify the warehouse address through independent channels in the next 30 minutes? Werner was already moving. "I'll use the Lucha contact." "Do it." He looked at Ilara. "You're coming to the council chamber." It was not a question. "The elders need to see the Keeper Authority active," she said. "Yes." "Then be ready in 20 minutes." He went up the stairs. She heard him talking to Brent again on the landing, heard the front door, heard the gravel. She sat alone for a moment in the room below the kitchen. Domenico's room, the room where the real architecture of the family had always lived, the room nobody glamorous visited. The ring was in the reader device, secured. The succession sequence was complete. The backup network was running. And somewhere in a warehouse district 40 minutes away, 9 people who had been building toward this for 2 years were preparing for an operation that was now running ahead of its own schedule because something had activated that wasn't supposed to activate, and the window they had counted on was closing. She stood. She climbed the stairs. She went to the back bedroom and changed clothes with the particular efficiency of someone who knows that how you walk into a room, matters when everything in the room is watching to see whether you belong there. When she emerged, Lucia was in the kitchen, coat on, ready. "The elders," Lucia said. "Yes." "I'll come." Alara looked at her. She thought about 14 months, about 8 months, about 6 weeks of confirmed knowledge withheld. She thought about this conversation they were not finished having, and she thought about the council chamber and what it would mean for an elder of Lucia Costa's international standing to walk into it beside the keeper of the covenant, and she made the calculation. "Stay close," she said. "Not forgiveness. Not yet. Operational." Lucia nodded. She understood the distinction. They were at the car when Werner's phone rang. He answered and listened, and his face did something she had learned to read very precisely over the course of their long professional relationship. It moved from focus into the specific alert stillness that meant the information he was receiving was significant and bad. He hung up. He looked at Alara. "The warehouse is confirmed," he said. 9 personnel, armed, Volkov network. He paused. "And Horn is there." Horn. Not running east, not heading for the state line. At the warehouse, which meant he had never been running. He had been moving toward the operational hub. He had known his cover was compromised and had gone to ground with the people who sent him rather than away from them, which meant he was not trying to escape. He was trying to accelerate from inside. "They're not waiting for tonight," Alara said. "No," Werner said. "Lucia's contact says they move at 4. She checked her watch. It was 2:15. 105 minutes. She got in the car and called Cassian and said, 4 o'clock, change your timeline. And Cassian, she stopped. Horn is at the warehouse. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Cassian said, in a voice that had gone somewhere past cold into a register she had only heard from him 3 times in 17 years, "I'll handle Horn." "Cassian, I said I'll handle it." The line went quiet. She held the phone in her lap and looked at the valley road unrolling in front of the car and felt the weight of what was moving toward 4 o'clock. The operational pieces, the people in motion, the compromised network, and the backup channel and 9 armed personnel in a warehouse, and a man who had been at Domenico's funeral positioning himself at the center of an attack on everything Domenico had built. 105 minutes. She put the phone in her pocket and looked at the road and said to Werner, who was driving, "Faster." The council chamber was older than anything else the Moretti family owned. It sat inside the original estate building, not the renovated main house with its marble and surveillance architecture, but the structure behind it, the one that predated Cassian's grandfather by 2 generations, with walls of dark timber and stone floors worn smooth by a century of people who understood what the room meant. There were no cameras inside it. There had never been cameras inside it. What was said in the council chamber existed only in the memories of the people present, and what was decided there carried a weight that no document could replicate and no recording could authenticate, because the weight came from presence, from the specific gravity of people who had earned the right to be in the room sitting together and speaking plainly. Alara arrived at 3:10. The elders were already there, 7 men and 1 woman, ages ranging from 61 to 84, people who had occupied various formal and informal positions inside the Moretti structure across decades, people whose relationship to the organization was so deeply embedded that it had long since stopped being professional and become something more like biological. They rose when she entered, not a performance, not a gesture of ceremony, a reflex. The specific reflex of people whose bodies had learned, over years, to respond to something they recognized. She walked to the head of the table and stood. The ring was in her jacket pocket, returned from the reader device, warm from the contact of her hand. The succession sequence was active. The backup network was running. What she needed now was not technical. It was human, which was always harder. "You know what's happening tonight," she said. No preamble. These people didn't need preamble. "You've been receiving the backup channel signal for the last 2 hours. You know what it means that it's active." She looked at each face in turn. "I'm not here to ask for your support. I'm here to tell you what I'm going to do with it." The oldest man at the table, a retired financial architect named Corso, who had known Domenico since they were young men and who had not spoken in a formal council capacity in 11 years, leaned forward slightly. "The warehouse. Cassian is moving on it at 3:45. With what resources? Brent and 8 men. It will be enough for 9 Volkov personnel if the element of surprise holds. She paused. The problem is Horn. The name moved through the room. She watched it move, saw the specific quality of discomfort that it produced, the tightening around eyes, the small collective recoil of people who had trusted a man for 20 years and were now sitting with what that trust had cost. Horn knows the physical layout of every Moretti property, she said. He knows the security rotations. He knows which captains are currently isolated by the false order campaign and can't respond quickly. Whatever Volkov's operational plan is, Horn built the tactical architecture for it. She let that sit for a moment. Cassian knows this. He's accounting for it. And if the warehouse operation fails? This from the woman at the table, a compact, gray-haired person named Vega, who had managed the family's legitimate business portfolio for 15 years and who asked questions with the precision of someone who had spent a career identifying where plans had soft centers. If the warehouse operation fails, we hold with what we have, Alara said. The backup network keeps the captains coherent. The Linden accounts are insulated. The Volkov network can hurt us, but they can't take the organization if the organizational backbone holds. She looked at Vega directly. It will hold. I've spent 15 years making sure it could survive exactly this kind of pressure. Vega held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. There's one more thing, Alara said. She reached into her jacket pocket and set the black crest ring on the table in front of her. Not wearing it, setting it down, in the center of the table, where everyone could see it. After tonight, when this is resolved, however it resolves, I want to propose a restructuring of how this family makes decisions. She looked at the ring, then at the room. One person wearing one ring shouldn't be able to do what happened 2 nights ago, shouldn't be able to make a decision that jeopardizes 100 years of structure in a single public gesture. She looked up. We build a council that has actual authority, not advisory, not ceremonial, actual structural authority over decisions of this magnitude. No single person, not Cassian, not me, can move the organization's core assets or authority without council ratification. The room was quiet. Corso said, Domenico would have agreed. I know. He designed the keeper role as a check on exactly that kind of unilateral action. I'm proposing we make it institutional rather than personal. She picked the ring up, held it. Personal authority dies with the person. Institutional authority survives them. She put the ring back in her pocket. After tonight, she said. Well, Cassian hit the warehouse at 3:42. He went in through the east loading dock with Brent and 4 men, while 2 others took the roof access, and 2 more held the vehicle perimeter. The intelligence Werner had confirmed gave them the layout. A 2-story structure, main operational floor below, a mezzanine office level above. The 9 Volkov personnel distributed between them with Horn in the upstairs office. The 4 o'clock timeline had been Volkov's plan before they knew the keeper sequence was active. Cassian was counting on those 18 minutes of confusion. The gap between an organization that knew its window was closing and an organization that had fully adapted to that knowledge. Confusion was the only advantage he had, and he was taking it at 3:42 rather than 4, because every minute of confusion was worth more to him than any minute of preparation. The east dock door came open without resistance, which was the first wrong thing. Brent caught it too. Felt it in the same half-second Cassian did, both of them pulling up slightly, reading the space ahead with the specific attention of men who have walked into rooms that were not what they appeared. The dock was dim, high-ceilinged, smelled of machine oil and cold concrete. 2 vehicles parked to the left, a bank of shelving to the right. Ahead, the main floor, lit by industrial overhead lights that cast everything in a flat, depthless illumination. Empty. Not the emptiness of a space that had been vacated. The emptiness of a space being held, bodies pulled back, breath held, the specific full silence of people choosing to be quiet. Spread, Cassian said low. They spread. The first shot came from the mezzanine, and it was a warning shot, deliberately high, deliberately loud, kicking concrete dust 3 feet to the left of where Cassian was standing. The message of it was clear. We know you're here, we have the elevation, and we're choosing to communicate before we commit. Moretti, the voice came from above, accented, controlled, projecting without shouting. We're past the point where this ends well for either of us, through violence. Cassian didn't move from his position behind the vehicle to his left. Brent was 8 feet to his right, back against the shelving, weapon up. The other men had found cover positions. He could hear them barely, the slight sounds of bodies adjusting. "Where's Horn?" Cassian said. A pause. Then Horn's voice, familiar, 63 years old, carrying the particular timbre of a man who had spent decades projecting judicial authority and was using that same instrument now in a context that made it grotesque. "I'm here, Cassian. Come to the railing." Another pause. Then the sound of footsteps on the mezzanine, and Horn appeared at the railing. A tall man, silver-haired, still in the suit he'd worn to the farmhouse the previous morning, which felt like a detail from a different era. He put both hands on the railing and looked down. "You drove yourself to the valley this morning," Horn said. "No driver. I watched the feed." "I know you watched it. You went to her." "Obviously." Horn looked at his hands on the railing. "I want you to understand something, not as a justification, as a fact." He raised his eyes. "The Moretti organization has been running on borrowed architecture for 20 years. Structure that your grandfather built on foundations he never explained to you. Alliances you benefit from without understanding their terms. Authority you exercise without knowing what actually sustains it." He paused. Volkov's position was that a family operating that blind is a liability to everyone connected to it, an unstable nuclear reactor. Eventually something goes wrong and the fallout is everyone's problem. So you decided to be the controlled demolition. I decided to facilitate a transition to a more stable arrangement by putting a foreign asset in my bed for 2 years. Horn said nothing. By forging my wife's messages. By isolating her inside our marriage until I believed she'd stopped loving me. By dismantling 17 years of... Cassian stopped. His jaw worked. When he spoke again, his voice had recompressed into something cold and functional. "You were at my grandfather's funeral. You held his hand before he died." Horn's expression shifted. Something moved across it that was not entirely unfeeling. "Yes." "Did you know then? About the keeper role? About Alara?" A long pause. "I suspected. Domenico was thorough but not perfect. There were indicators." He looked down at his hands again. "I told myself it didn't matter, that the family's fundamental instability was structural, not personal, that what we were doing was necessary. And now?" Horn was quiet for 3 seconds. "Now I'm standing on a mezzanine in a warehouse at 3:45 in the afternoon because the woman your grandfather chose proved more formidable than anyone's model accounted for." Something moved in his face that might, in different circumstances, have been described as rueful. "That's not nothing." "No," Cassian said. "It isn't." He looked up at Horn for a moment, at the man he had trusted for 20 years, at the specific way a 20-year trust looks when you understand it was engineered, the way a painting looks when you understand it's a forgery, the surface unchanged and the value gone. He felt the weight of it and acknowledged the weight and set it aside. "Tell your people to put their weapons on the floor," he said. "All of them, right now." "And in exchange?" "In exchange, the conversation we have next is the kind where you walk out of here." Horn looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned away from the railing and spoke quietly to someone Cassian couldn't see. A pause. Then the sounds, the specific series of sounds, heavy and metallic, of weapons being set on concrete floors. 3, 4, more. Brent was counting too. Cassian heard him, low, in his ear. 7 confirmed. 9 personnel, 7 weapons down. 2 unaccounted for. Before Cassian could process that arithmetic, the 2 accounted for people made their presence known. Not from the mezzanine, from the east dock behind him, the door he had come through, the door that had opened without resistance, and now he understood why. They had let him in. They had wanted him inside before closing the perimeter. The 2 men who came through the east dock were not Volkov personnel. They were Reyes's men. They came in fast and clean and moved to flanking positions with the efficiency of people who had drilled this specific scenario, and one of them said to Cassian, without looking at him, "Mrs. Moretti sends a message. 2 of them repositioned to the east approached 20 minutes ago. We've had eyes on them since." Cassian looked at the east dock where his ambush had just been preempted by a woman who was currently sitting in a council chamber 3 miles away and who had apparently anticipated this particular tactical complication and deployed a counter before he'd finished driving to the location. He turned back to the mezzanine. Horn, I'm going to say this once. The council chamber was still. Elara sat at the head of the table and waited. Werner was beside her with a phone pressed to his ear, relaying in fragments. Team in position. East dock breach completed. Mezzanine contact established. She listened to the fragments and assembled them into a picture and held the picture steady in her mind without reacting to any individual piece, the way you navigate using a map instead of responding to every tree. The room knew not to speak. The elders sat around the table and they knew. Werner said, "Horn is in custody." The room exhaled, not loudly, a collective quiet release of breath held for 105 minutes. Elara said, "Cassian." On his way back, Werner lowered the phone. "Two of ours were hurt, not critically. Brent has a grazed shoulder. He's refusing medical until the site is secured." "Make him accept medical," she said. "I'll pass that along," Werner said, in the tone of someone who understood that Brent would refuse regardless, and that the instruction was nonetheless worth giving. She looked at the ring on the table in front of her. She had set it there again during the wait, unable to explain why exactly. A need to have it visible, external, outside of her body. The way you put down something heavy that you've been carrying for a long time. Because the carrying has been so constant that you've stopped being able to feel its weight and need to see it in order to understand what it actually is. 100 years old. A piece of metal with an obsidian stone and an embedded signal architecture that a brilliant, paranoid old man had installed 20 years ago and told only one person about. A thing that had been used as a trophy, as a weapon, as a love letter, and an insult and a key and a lock, all within the space of 48 hours. She picked it up. She was not going to wear it. That had never been the plan. But she held it for a moment and let herself feel its weight accurately. Not the weight of power, not the weight of what it had cost, but the simple physical weight of a thing that was, at its core, a tool. A tool built by someone who understood that every structure needs a failsafe, and that the failsafe needs a keeper, and that the keeper needs to be someone who understands that the whole point is to never have to use it. She set it on the table. "After tonight," she said, "I want to propose something to this council." Well, Cassian arrived at the ancestral estate at 5:40, not the main house. The council chamber building, which he had last entered at his ascension 7 years ago, when it had been full of men congratulating him on inheriting something they had let him believe was fully his. He came in through the old wooden door that was too low for a man his height, and had to duck, which he had always found mildly indignifying, which Domenico had always found mildly funny. He was clean. No blood on him. The warehouse had been more controlled than it might have been, thanks to the East Dock preemption, and the injuries had been to his men and not to him, which carried its own weight that he would process at a later time. He was tired in the specific way of a person who has been carrying high-level operational tension for 2 straight days and whose body is now presenting the invoice. He stopped in the doorway. Elara was at the head of the table. The elders were still there, all 8 of them, which told him the conversation had been running since she arrived and had not concluded. The black crest ring sat on the table in front of her, not on her hand, simply there between them all, like a fact. She looked at him. Her face was the face he had known for 17 years, not the face he had been looking at for the last 2 years of distance and misread signals and forged messages, but the face underneath that, the actual one, the one that had been there all along under the interference. He came in and sat down. Not at the foot of the table, set at the chair to her right, the one that had been empty, the one he had moved her away from by degrees over the last 2 years. Nobody said anything about it. "Horn?" she said. "Secured. I've put him with Magistrate Costa's people until we decide how to handle the formal process." He looked at the table. "He wants to give a full debrief in exchange for something. I haven't committed to terms." "What does he want?" "His daughter to be left out of it." Cassian's voice was flat. "He has a daughter in Boston, 24 years old. She doesn't know anything about any of this. He wants assurance she stays that way." Elara was quiet for a moment. "That's a human thing to want." "Yes." "Is it true? She's clean?" Werner verified it on the drive back. "She's a graduate student, architecture. No contact with any network we can identify." Elara looked at the table. "Then we give him that." He looked at her. "Just like that." "Just like that. She's not the problem, and she didn't make the choices. We're not in the business of punishing people for their parents. She met his eyes. And we need Horn's full cooperation to map the Volkov network's domestic infrastructure. He gives us everything, every contact, every communication, every asset he knows about. And his daughter stays a graduate student in Boston. Cassian nodded slowly. It was the right call. He recognized it as the right call, recognized also that arriving at it had taken her approximately 12 seconds and would have taken him considerably longer because he was still carrying the heat of 20 years of betrayal, and she had already converted it into something operational. The Volkov personnel from the warehouse? He asked. Reyes has them. The ones that talk get options. The ones that don't. She paused. We'll see. And Celine. The room shifted slightly. He felt it, the particular atmospheric change of a word landing in a space that has been carefully not saying it. He had called her on the drive back. From the estate, one of his trusted staff had confirmed she was still there, still contained, had eaten dinner at 6:30, and was watching television in the East Wing sitting room with the particular quality of someone waiting to find out what they were waiting for. I spoke with her this afternoon, Ilara said. He looked at her. When? While you were en route to the warehouse. Werner patched a call. She looked at the ring on the table. She asked to speak with me. The room was very quiet. She wanted to know if we were going to kill her, Ilara said. I told her we weren't. She asked why not. I told her because she gave Cassian the target list, and the list was accurate, and that decision cost her something. She paused. She said it didn't cost her anything, that she'd been calculating exits since the Volkov handler told her she'd be taken care of. I told her calculating exits and acting on them are different things, and that she had acted. Cassian was looking at his wife. What did she say? He asked. She said she wasn't sure whether she deserved credit for that or not. Ilara's voice was quiet, almost private, the register she used when she was telling the truth about something she hadn't decided how to feel about. I said I wasn't sure either, but that we were going to operate as though she did, because the alternative, treating every partial choice as meaningless, doesn't leave us anywhere to go. He sat with that for a moment. Outside, the light was failing, the long summer evening contracting finally, the sky going from gold to the specific bruised purple that came just before dark. What happens to her, he said. She leaves the country, not in a way that feels like exile, in a way that feels like the only available option, which it is. Lucia has contacts who can establish a viable life somewhere that is not here and is not connected to any network she's been part of. She goes, she stays quiet. She doesn't come back. Ilara looked at the ring. She's not a monster. She's a person who made decisions inside a system that was using her, and some of those decisions caused serious damage, and the ones she made at the end, when she understood the situation, were different. She looked up. People are complicated. That's not a weakness in the accounting. It's just accurate. The eldest man at the table, Corso, who had not spoken since his single contribution earlier, made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a sigh. Both. Cassian looked at Ilara. He thought about what it meant to sit in this room, at this table, beside a woman who had spent 17 years protecting something she'd never been publicly credited for, who had just spent 48 hours dismantling a 2-year operation against her family while being investigated for being part of it, who had, in the last hour of a warehouse operation she had not attended, positioned personnel to cover his flank without being asked, and without announcing she'd done it. He thought about a message he had believed for 2 years, a forged message, 13 words, that had done more damage than any physical attack could have, because it had arrived in the voice of the one person he had never been able to stop trusting, regardless of what he told himself. I don't think I love you anymore, and I don't think I have for a long time. He had believed it because it was in her syntax, because whoever built it had studied her well enough to write in the specific way she wrote when she was being honest about things that cost her. The forgery had been accurate precisely because the original was real, because Ilara, when she told hard truths, told them in exactly that voice, direct and unadorned, without softening. He had believed the forgery because he knew, somewhere, that she was capable of that honesty. He could not decide whether that was the worst part or the most human part, and had concluded it was both. Ilara, he said. She looked at him. The elders were present. That was fine. What he needed to say could be said in front of the people in this room. needed to be said in front of them. In fact, in the same way the wrong had been done in front of witnesses and needed witnesses for its accounting. "I owe you an apology that I don't know how to give," he said. "Not because I don't know the words, because the words aren't sufficient for the specific thing I did." He held her gaze. "I believed something about you that I should have questioned. I built 2 years of distance on a foundation I never examined. And I did it." He stopped, jaw tightening for a moment, then releasing, "because it was easier to believe you had stopped loving me than to believe I had done something to make you feel that way." The room was completely still. "That's not your fault," he said. "The forgery wasn't your fault. But my willingness to believe it, that was mine." He paused. "I'm telling you this here because the mistake was public. The correction should be public." Alara looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face. Not the thing he might have hoped for, not relief or the release of long-held tension, but something more complicated and more real. The expression of a person who has been waiting to hear something and has now heard it and is discovering that hearing it is not the same as being finished with what it cost. "I know," she said quietly. "I know you know. I'm saying it anyway." She nodded. A single, small movement. Corso cleared his throat, not to speak, just to signal his continued presence, the human equivalent of acknowledging that something had happened in the room that deserved its moment. Then Vega said, "The council restructuring proposal, you said after tonight." Alara's eyes moved to Vega. Something shifted in her expression. The return of the operational self, but gentler now. The particular quality of someone letting two things exist at once without making either of them wait for the other. "Yes," she said. She looked at the table, at the ring, at the people around it. The keeper of the covenant role stays, but it becomes the council's instrument rather than one person's private responsibility. I hold it during this transition. After the transition, it rotates on a 7-year term, nominated by the sitting council. She paused. "No single person should carry what I've been carrying alone. The weight doesn't make you stronger, it just makes you invisible." Cassian listened. He watched the elders respond, the small movements of comprehension and consideration, the way Corso's head tilted, the way Vega's hands settled flat on the table in the posture of someone who has heard something they intend to support. He said, "I want a seat at that council, not the head of it, a seat." Alara looked at him. "I've spent 7 years believing I ran this organization," he said. "I want to spend the next 7 years actually understanding it." He paused. "I'll need a patient teacher." The look she gave him at that contained several things simultaneously. The specific exasperation of a woman who has been managing a brilliant, difficult person for 17 years and recognizes she is not done. Something that was not quite amusement but lived in its neighborhood. And underneath both of those, something quieter and more durable, the thing that had persisted through 2 years of forged messages and manufactured distance and a very public humiliation at a centennial party, and had still been present enough, apparently, to hold. "Patience has never been my strongest quality," she said. "No," he said, "but you've been practicing it for 17 years, so presumably you're better than you think." Corso made that sound again, the one that wasn't a word. This time it was clearly a laugh, barely contained, an old man's dignified amusement at two people who had been circling each other for 20 years and were perhaps, finally, facing the same direction. 3 days later, Alara went back to the main estate. Not to reclaim it, not to make a statement. She went back because Werner needed access to the physical archives in the basement office, and because 3 of the 7 targeted captains needed face-to-face reassurance from someone they trusted, and because the council's first formal meeting was scheduled for the following week, and the chamber in the old building needed to be opened and aired and prepared. She walked through the main house on her way through. She had lived here for 15 years. The marble floors, the high ceilings, the particular quality of light in the afternoon through the western windows. She knew all of it the way you know your own body, the specific knowledge that doesn't require attention. She walked through it and felt, not nostalgia exactly, but something like the accurate assessment of a place you have outgrown, the way you can love something and also understand that it was never quite right for you. She stopped in the main foyer. On the table near the door, the table that had always held flowers, because she had always kept flowers in the foyer, One of the small personal details she'd maintained in the years when the large structural ones were eroding. There was a vase with flowers. Not formal arrangements, not the professional displays she had ordered from the estate's usual suppliers. Something rougher. Wildflower from the grounds, cut and arranged with evident effort and evident inexperience. She stood looking at the flowers for a moment. She heard Cassian's footsteps on the stairs. He came down and stopped on the landing and saw her standing at the table and said nothing, which she appreciated. "You cut those yourself," she said. "Werner showed me where they grow on the south grounds." A pause. "I may have consulted a resource on arrangement." A resource. "Werner has opinions." She turned to look at him. He was standing on the landing with both hands in his pockets, wearing the deliberate understatement of his dark clothes, his face showing the specific vulnerability of a man who has put something on a table that he cannot take back and is standing very still, waiting to see what happens. She thought about 17 years. She thought about the weight of what she had been carrying and what it had done to her shape. Not broken her, but changed her the way carrying anything for a long time changes the person carrying it, creating strengths in some places and compressions in others, a body organized around a load. She thought about the council, about what she had proposed and what they had agreed to and what the next years would look like. Not simpler, not easier, but differently structured, weight distributed instead of concentrated, the fail-safe made institutional instead of personal. She thought about the graduate student in Boston who would keep studying architecture without knowing how close the world she didn't know about had come to touching her. She thought about Celine Voss on a plane to somewhere Lucia had arranged, carrying whatever she was carrying, which was complicated and human, and not Alara's problem to resolve. She thought about an old man in a hospital room who had pressed something cold into her palm and told her that the loud thing is almost never the real thing. She walked to the table and touched one of the wildflowers, a small yellow one, slightly bruised from handling, less than perfectly placed. She straightened it. It didn't stay straightened. She let it be. "The council meets Thursday," she said. "I know. I cleared my schedule." "All of it? You have the DeLuca?" "I cleared all of it." He came down the last 3 stairs and stood in the foyer. "I have things I'm learning to understand are more important than the DeLuca review." She looked at him. He looked at her. The foyer was full of afternoon light through the western windows, the specific light she had always liked about this time of day in this house, the quality of it that made everything slightly more honest than it looked in other lights, the imperfections visible, the distances accurate. "The ring," she said. "I want to discuss where it lives during the transition period. I thought you'd keep it at the farmhouse. I think it belongs here." She looked at the table. "In the council chamber. In a case that requires 2 signatures to open, mine and whoever chairs the council session. It belongs to the structure, not to a person." She paused. "That was what your grandfather intended and didn't know how to build. We can build it now." Cassian was quiet for a moment. Then, "He would have been pleased." "He would have said it took long enough," she said. Something moved across his face, the ghost of a real smile, brief, unperformed. It looked good on him. She had forgotten how good a real expression looked on him when he wasn't managing it. "Probably," he said. She picked up the vase of wildflowers and moved it 6 inches to the left, where the light hit it better, where the slight imperfection of the arrangement was less visible and the colors were truer. Then she stepped back and looked at it. Not perfect. Genuinely imperfect, in fact. Visibly the product of effort rather than expertise, of someone trying without knowing exactly how. She could work with that. "Thursday," she said. "Don't be late." "I won't," he said. She left the vase on the table and walked toward the basement archive, past the marble and the surveillance architecture and the grand constructed surface of the Moretti estate, toward the thing underneath it where the real work had always lived, where it would continue to live, where she would continue to do it, differently now, distributed now, no longer alone with the weight of it pressing her shape into something only she could see. Behind her, in the foyer, the afternoon light moved across a vase of imperfect wildflowers and held them, briefly, the way good light holds imperfect things, clearly, without apology, showing exactly what